Jeremy.
This goes for both candidates. I know here locally in Ohio, Chillicothe, they are wanting to reduce the fire department and the police department. And being a U.S. Coast Guard veteran, that was going to be my main still for getting work for dispatcher positions. They've already reduced positions in Columbus. They have already reduced positions in Washington Courthouse. And I'm wondering, I know that we need to balance the government, but what are we going to do between a balance and sustaining what needs to happen currently in each said city? How do we remain strong with the police departments and fire departments and balance the budget?
What's your question for?
It's for both candidates.
Well, the answer to have revenues to a local government level is to get this economy going, get people back to work, and when more people are working, more taxes are paid, and you get the revenues going. And what we have to do to get that done is, like I said, in my opening statement, we've got to get confidence back and get that going. But what we have, part of the thing we have to cut spending at the federal level, because you can't spend and borrow yourselves to prosperity, okay? And there's lots of things we can do. We can change the process, because the legislative process is broken in Washington, D.C., and the budgeting process is broken. We need to split those budget bills up, the appropriations bills, and go through them more line by line, and prioritize and provide the services that people expect, and get all the pork barrel and duplicative expenses out of there. We need to look at domestic discretionary spending, as I call it, go back to fiscal year 08 levels, because it's grown at double digits the last 2 fiscal years. We need to do more contract bidding, put things out, try to break up that monopoly of the federal government. Cost-cutting measures, that's what we do. And because it all goes back to the deficit, the massive deficit. We've got to get that cut. And when we do that, we get confidence, people start investing again, and that will provide more revenues at the state and local levels. And just so I take my minute, I want to say, the reason I'm here tonight, because I've never turned down an invitation to come talk to people, voters, constituents, the citizens. And Zach Space is not here, and he said he would come after the primary and part, but the Democrats send their, what they call the trackers back here, videotaping me, because they're trying to catch me in an oops moment, okay? So I just want you to all be aware of that. And Congressman Space can't come, but he can send somebody to come and film me.
Directly to your question, sir, federal government does not run fire departments. It's not their job. It's not in the U.S. Constitution to be their job. That is by the state and the local community. The problem is the federal government, is, if everybody recalls, back when they had to put more cops on the beat thing, I think back during the Clinton years, and they made all these mandates on each state, and someone told them back then, a lot of folks told them back then, well, what happens when the money runs out? Money ran out. Guess what? Federal government's broke. Does anyone understand that the federal government's broke? Does anyone in Washington, D.C. even understand that? They do not understand that. When you owe if I owed $14 trillion and I had a budget and I overran my budget every year by $1.5 trillion, what would you call me? Would you not call me broke? The federal government is broke. And what needs to happen as far as states are concerned, because I've heard both of my opponents talk about bringing jobs back to Ohio, bringing jobs back to the 18th district. I'm going to tell you right now, and this may be a reason for you not to vote for me, but the federal government's job, and your representative's job, is not to go to Washington, D.C. and bring jobs back to the district, the Ohio 18th district. That's not the job of Congress. Congress's job is to simply regulate commerce so that the states can be competitive one with the other, and then at the state level, where this particular opponent is here tonight, Mr. Gibbs, who is at the state senate, that's where they're supposed to do things to make jobs come to this community by lowering taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not the federal government's job, sir. It just absolutely is not. And if the powers were put back to the states where they belonged, I guarantee you would be employed today, because the states have a lot better ability, because they're closer to the people, to manage things such as funding for fire departments, et cetera, at the local level.
answer your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Mike?
With the country being in such a tremendous debt, could you tell me of any program at the federal level that you could actually cut? And I mean cut the whole thing out. Entitlement program, any social programs, what would you cut?
Lindsay? You guys, where's microphone?
Would you really?
Yeah. Oh, it's up to you guys.
I have a bad angle on this light. Both candidates have talked about cutting back the federal expenditures. On one hand, I'm not going to say who's who; they'll speak for themselves. But on one hand, there are those who are proponents for taking a scalpel to different departments, and or taking an axe. And I've said this before: we need to take a chainsaw. We need to sever some departments from the U.S. government, and I'll name you some. U.S. Department of Education, bam, number one on my list. And here's the biggest reason. For every dollar we send to Washington, D.C., in our tax money, we get 15 cents of that back. If we're lucky enough to say the right thing, to plead for our money back, like we're jumping up for a carrot like animals, for the tax dollars that we sent to Washington, D.C., and we may or may not get that money back. Fortunately, we got it back because someone was clever enough to word this little race to the top program so we get that $400 million back. Why did we send it to them in the first place? That's one. We've got the Department of Energy. Department of Energy, which was established in 1977 for the purpose of trying to figure out a way to get off of foreign oil. At that time, we were at 30% dependency on foreign oil. We're now at 70. That don't seem to be working to me. Department of Transportation. What's the Department of Transportation doing for us? Well, right now they're funneling a bunch of money into these speed rail programs and all those things that we're never going to use here in central, southeastern Ohio. I can't see, a bullet train running from Chillicothe to Columbus. I just can't see that. And so the funds that go to that are going to big cities out west and east, if they ever even develop those programs. But that's part of the transportation budget. Department of Agriculture. There's a whole bunch of slicing and dicing we can do at that level. A whole bunch of things. And let me give you an example of that. And y'all please look these things up for yourself. But New Zealand, it's not America, but it's New Zealand. The small country of New Zealand used to have a lot of subsidies and they had a lot of government oversight into their agriculture program. And they are one of the largest agricultural producers as far as the basis of their economy. They did away with all that, and their agriculture industry grew. It grew. They only have 1% of all of their government funding that goes toward agriculture in any way, shape, or form. But our agriculture department, for example, includes forestry. Includes so many other things that don't have anything to do with agriculture per se. But there are just so many of them, and there's a long list. Perhaps I should have brought it, but those are some examples. And there could even be budgets. There could even be cuts made at the Defense Department. I know. As a member of the Air Force, the C-117 program, the Pentagon didn't want it, but because some factors that made them and made parts for them and all that, and the political thing, I'm out of time. Excuse me.
Well, we've got to change how the budget process works. We've got to not do baseline spending. We got to prioritize. We've got performance audits. We've got to look through everything's got to be on the table. And when I said earlier, the domestic discretionary spending growing at more than double digits in the last 2 fiscal years, that's not sustainable when the economy was going the other way. So what we need to do right away, early next year, is get that category down to fiscal year 8 levels, just to start with as a goal. And then we need to, this earmark stuff, that has to stop. Anything has to go through a very open and transparent budget process. Competitive contract bidding, we need to open things up to the private sector and let them bid. I mean, you can do that. We do a lot of that in defense anyways, even national security stuff, because that's part of the contract. And and try to break up that big monopoly. And that would lower costs, and a little competition there would lower costs. Duplication. We've got some agencies, federal government, doing the same thing. Some of the things they're doing as in another. There's no reason to have agencies doing the same thing. So there's a lot of duplication. That's why you need to really dig into that budget. Fraud. We have a lot of, I understand, you know, in Medicaid and Medicare, there's a lot of fraud. We've got to get tough with that. So there's, I think there's a lot. One thing I've noticed, you know, in my 8 years in the State House, there's government just by nature, there's a lot of waste. There's places to cut. At the federal level, it's just completely out of control because they never ever cut. And what I've learned at the state level, when there's less revenues coming in, things get cut because the states have to have a balanced budget every June 30th. They either borrow money, not borrow money, they can't borrow money, cut spending or raise taxes or a combination. Federal government doesn't do that. So every year it keeps going up. They didn't pass a budget this year, first time since 1974. They didn't pass any appropriations bills. So what they do, they pass what they call CRs, continuing resolutions. Okay, so all that is to keep the government operating. There's no budget, there's no blueprint, and so they just keep on spending. And you know, Zach's Space, they were called back here a few weeks ago, Nancy Pelosi, to spend $26 billion they didn't have, and Zach attacked me. He said, well, it's deficit neutral. Here's how it's deficit neutral. $10 billion, they're going to raise taxes on American companies that just happen to do business overseas. So I guess we're going to encourage them to leave totally and take jobs with them. And the $16 billion, the $26 billion was to cut food stamps in 4 years. That's not budgeting. That's not pay as you go. That'd be like you going out and making a big expenditure and say, oh, I'm justifying it in my mind because in 4 years we're going to spend less money. This is insanity, and that's what our Congress and our congressmen have been doing. And so we just got to put private practice, business practices into the budget process and open it up. It's transparent, not load it up in big bills, big huge budget bills during the night, and pass things in on what they're passing. We've got to get back to the regular legislative process that's open and transparent and accountable.